thanks everybody for coming to the talk today. Just to get started, I appreciate your attendance. I thought, okay, I'm giving this talk about security metrics. Let's take a look at the LASCON at Schedge and see all the different talks. This is the only one on metrics. Why is that? I'm curious, how many people work on security metrics in this room? I've got a few. How many people like working on security metrics? Okay, we got one. Cool. I like security metrics as well. But one of the things I did, and I've given this talk just once before, actually at B-Sides Albuquerque, and then I went through, wanted to make some updates for this talk. I'm like, I'm going to go listen to some podcasts, and I did some digging. How many people like to listen to DevSecOps podcasts in here, or to do? Not a couple people. I don't do it that often, but I think it is a good resource to go check out. So I was looking at Absolute AppSec, and they had a podcast about security metrics. I think the two guys that do Absolute AppSec, one's like a GitHub security guru leader guy, and the other guy has his own company. It's pretty cool. The thing I noticed about it is it took them like 30 minutes of discussion to get to like what metrics they actually like. Like, why is this so difficult? Right? We're talking about tracking your security program and your environment. Shouldn't this be easy? But it's really not. It's really a challenging problem. So in this talk, I'm going to get into some recommendations about security metrics and benefits of those metrics and things that you can think about for your program. Help your program mature. Recommendations to your team, and just kind of getting into it. The title is, we call it velocity plus safety, but security metrics that all engineers or DevOps should care about. And that's an important piece here when you're thinking about your security metrics program, is that it can't just be for your security team. And a lot of times I see that with security metrics is that there are metrics about security events, issues for security people. And there's elements of that. You've got internal reporting, which is great. But there's also an opportunity to tell your story more broadly with metrics. So we're going to talk a bit about that. So again, just quick intro. We're going to do a bit of a Simpsons theme here because I think it's fun. But again, with the intro, VP of Security Engineering and CISO at JIT. What do I love to do outside of security? Big music fan, love being here in Austin. Awesome music down here. I live in Dallas, so we had to come down here to Austin for all the good stuff. Security and compliance. When I was at KPMG, spent a lot of time working on security and compliance processes. Opportunity to join a startup, and coming to a conference like LASCON, you really get a feel for some of the great professionals out there. They're looking to solve some of these complex challenges, and just an open dialogue. So. Just kudos to all you guys for everything that you provide at this conference. This is a fun, one of the most, if not the most fun conferences to come to, in my opinion, and that's because of the people. So again, thanks so much. All right, so what are we going to cover today? We're going to get into some of the benefits of security metrics, talk through that. We're also going to touch a bit on DORA metrics, because a lot of times when you're looking to generate, different types of, security metrics, what out there, how are we measuring and tracking, other things out there? So looking at DORA, I'm going to talk about, if you don't know what DORA is, I'll talk about what DORA is. And then I really feel like there's been an evolution of security metrics in recent years, and, kind of the old way of doing it and some of the newer ways, and, talking about, getting engineers and other people involved in your security metrics. We're going to talk about that. And then some of the evolution. And then there is going to be a bit of a product pitch at the end. You're in the JIT room. We're a platinum sponsor. Sorry, but you're going to hear a bit about that and how JIT can help you with your security metrics program. All right, so getting started here, kind of setting the stage of, what are the key benefits of security metrics? And you think about this, right? First off, your strengths and weaknesses simplified, right? So when you're putting together security metrics, you're going to call out areas where, hey, you want to make yourself look good. Right? And certainly that's going to be a big part of it. Hey, we're doing a great job of fixing vulnerabilities, or we're hiring the right people. We've got the skill sets that we need. We're improving over time. That's good, but there's also an opportunity to show, hey, we've got resource needs that we have, right? There's skill set gaps out there. So some of those strengths and weaknesses and simplifying those, that's a really important piece you want to think about. The other one is telling your security story. Every organization is a bit different, especially talking, every company operates a little bit differently. Even here at LASCON, we all hear those perspectives. And what I see a lot with security metrics programs is that a lot of times they're inherited maybe from a previous regime, like, hey, I came in and this was already there. We just kind of kept going and it made sense to leadership. But you kind of go on autopilot a little bit when that happens. And you want, with the metrics program, you want to think about, again, what's your story? What are the key themes you want to tell about how you're doing well, where you need help? And go back and think about that, right? Maybe it's a bit philosophical, but it's important to kind of sometimes go back to center. Even if you have the same metrics program for a while, that could be helpful for you to kind of go back and think about, are we telling the story that we want to tell, right? And rethink it. The other one here, conveying your system smarts and security awareness. This one, and of course, Professor Frank, he's the smartest scientist in the world. There could be an element of too much of that. Maybe you're talking over the head of your audience, so be careful there. But at the same time, hey, if you've got a good understanding of your security posture, where your key risks are, you want to tell that story, right? So I think that's where you're doing really well, you want to be able to tell that strongly. And then continuous improvement. This gets back to the strengths and weaknesses simplified, but you're over time, if you need help, if you need support, resources, skill sets, tools, you can use those metrics to be able to explain where those gaps are and help you with that continuous improvement program. All right, so kind of getting into the security metrics piece here, and again, doing some comparison about, well, what are other metrics programs out there that can be helpful for us? One thing that I've learned a lot about in the past year and a half are DORA metrics. I'm curious how many people, I know there's been some other talks here about DORA, how many people know what DORA metrics are or use them? It's okay if not many. Yeah, so maybe like a general understanding. What I think is cool about DORA metrics, and like here's, what is it, right? It's the DevOps research and assessment metrics, and this kind of provides a consistent leading practice framework for engineering organizations to measure and benchmark their performance. I think about, as a security professional, as a CISO, engineering, it's complicated, right? I look at my VP of engineering and other engineering leaders that I know really well. Like, hey, they're working really hard on making product updates, getting those updates out the door, fewer flaws and issues overall. That's a big part of what engineering does. And then tracking them, like, man, that's got to be really hard. Well, wait a second. DORA has made this really straightforward and very relatable to many different audiences. So I've become a big fan of DORA. And here's just a bit more about DORA. Again, providing that consistent leading practice framework. Well, look, first off, looks at deployment frequency, right? How often are we able to successfully release software to production? That'll tell us, hey, are we moving as fast and is our velocity where it should be? Lead time to changes, right? How long is it taking us to get through the pipeline? From a code change from a commit state to deployable state, so it tracks that. Mean time to recovery, so if there's an outage, how quickly are we recovering? And then the change failure rate, how often the team changes leads to a failure after deployment. But it's really revolutionized the engineering world because it's made it, again, very simple and straightforward to show where's our health, where are we doing well, and where are those gaps where we need those additional skill sets, tools, things to fill those gaps. And you could show this to C-level, you could bring this down to your team. It's very relatable, right? So I think that's a kind of a good model to think about, hey, when I'm putting into my security metrics, what's another good model? DORA is a good one. It's one that we use. All right, so on to a bit about the past of security metrics and kind of where we're going. And I think Mr. Burns, unfortunately, and again, I've been a security professional for 15 years. I love the role, but there is a general perception out there, especially with engineers, of like, if I go talk to the security guy, security gal, they're gonna tell me, oh wait, hold on a second, I need to do this review, I need to run this scan, before you go document this process. There's a lot of the whole culture of no out there, right? Now I think we're getting better, and I'd say everyone I've talked, most everyone I've talked to at LASCON is very progressive and is looking to support engineering. But this is a general perception in the engineering world around security, right? And we want to be able to, we want to be able to change that. But some of these challenges of, being behind the curve, the extra work, and then there's all these risks. So, engineers are provided, issues that need to go be solved, but they're not prioritized. So when everything's out there, nothing's a priority. And then a lot of compliance work. And that is the reality of the security world, is that we have to help our companies get through these compliance processes. But engineers don't always love that, or they just don't really get it, or it's not relatable to their world. So, just a few examples of some of the outdated security metrics that I think that we utilize sometimes in the security world that don't provide a whole lot of value. The first one, I call these count metrics, right? And a lot of times these are easy to generate, right? You could show, hey, aggregate of, hey, we've applied all these patches, number of incidents over the past year, there's 0, great. Number of tools deployed, we're rapidly, deploying tools or deploying the tools that we need. But they don't provide that context, right? So a lot of times from a security perspective, you feel like, hey, it's showing that we're doing good, but you provide it to your audience and they're like, okay, great, but what does it mean, right? It doesn't have that meaning behind it. Then they get to things like raw metrics, right? And these are things like, we've had this many attacks out there, right? And the firewall denials, or this many vulnerabilities were detected in our system. And it can show from a security perspective, hey, we're super busy because we have all these vulnerabilities. And again, it can help maybe justify your existence, but in the end, does it really tell the story that you want to tell as a security professional? So something to think through there. And then I'd say I call these the misleading metrics. And we all love Grandpa Simpson. He means well, right? He's not intentionally trying to mislead anybody. But things like, again, the total viruses detected, malware block, things like your user training attendance. Well, we trained everyone attended the training class. Do they really know, have we really done our due diligence for security awareness? So, these can be easy to kind of, not easy, but simpler to put together as part of your metrics program, but they don't really necessarily tell the story that you want to tell. And again, maybe you use them internally, right? Within your security team, and it could be helpful to track. But think about a lot of times with these metrics, they're external metrics that you want to share. All right, so back to kind of the old way and the new way. We talked about Mr. Burns, and he's not the greatest guy. I wouldn't want to work for him. It's not a very fun work environment. Homer's a little happier over here, right? And why is he happier? You look at this from a more modern and progressive piece, is that if we're supporting engineering and velocity as part of our software development, as part of our product, and we utilize security metrics to be able to tell that story, we're getting along better, right? Hey, engineering is they utilize the metrics. It's beneficial for them. From a security perspective, we're showing how we're working together. From a leadership perspective, we're pulling up the most important things to be able to share with that. So, these are more progressive kind of mindsets when you're putting together your security metrics program. Championing developer velocity in ownership. Getting integrated into different development stages as well. So it's not just in production. You're showing throughout your development lifecycle how you're getting better. Prioritizing those real risks. And compliance is more of an outcome. It's a much better situation to show that your organization is working together, and then having your metrics tell that, your security metrics tell that story. All right, so as we think through and kind of moving from the old way and progressing into a Homo sapien here, what are some of those next generation security metrics? And there's a couple things I wanted to show that I like that I utilize across my team at JIT, and some of my within my connections and circle works well. First off, the environment coverage, right? And I think that's an important piece. Again, this is more of an internal security team, but are we covering all of the resources, the code repositories, the cloud accounts? Think about your third-party vendors, and how you define a resource can be important. But from a coverage perspective, do we feel like we have a good understanding of our environment and do we feel like we have appropriate security controls and tools in place for, that shows that we're full and complete across our environment? And then things like security controls, are they implemented across the environment as we would like? Or maybe we haven't fully rolled out, some of the controls, and we have a multi-cloud, and maybe there's an environment we haven't implemented yet. Something you want to track as well. Again, this could be helpful to show to leadership, to show, hey, we've got some gaps here. Some skill set gaps or tool gaps. But again, it's something that can be good to set that context of where are we in terms of implementing the security controls and covering our environment where we want to be. And then things like open findings per security control. So, if we're running different types of security tests, things like secrets detection, SAST, what does it look like in terms of setting context of what we're seeing in terms of those numbers? And then the open findings per resource type and mapping that down. Again, these are more raw numbers, but they can help set the context and telling the story. So if you have these metrics, maybe these actually go in the appendix of your security metrics presentation. If it goes to leadership to be able to back it up, that could be. But again, it could be helpful to be able to give more context if needed to the story that you're telling. Sometimes you got to back it up. So a few metrics here I'm going to walk through. We call these more next-gen metrics. But from a security perspective, this is one that I really like and I've been focused on a lot recently, is security detection rate. As we get it, there's been a lot of great talks about DevSecOps, for the past 2 days here at LASCON, and you hear a lot of consistent themes, right? Like Jim Manico this morning, he was very passionate. He's always passionate. I love Jim. About, hey, scan every piece of code. When every change is made, every pull request happens, that's when it goes live. And I totally agree with them. Is that making sure that you're running those security tests across all those changes in your environment, whether it's code or getting into your cloud environments. Whenever a change happens, to be able to implement a security test or security tool for that. That's where you want to get. I know it's not always so easy to implement, but that's where you want to get. So you think about that. Okay, I talked about the context metrics, right? Your coverage and the controls. You look at the security detection rate. This can tell a really important story about how you're getting better at fewer and fewer vulnerabilities detected for each one of those scans, right? Because that should happen, right? I mean, especially you look at the code scans, like for your developers. Like if you're scanning every piece of code and then that comes back to the developers, they're seeing those findings and vulnerabilities and then they're going back and fixing those. Well, once they fixed it once, they're like, okay, I don't want to deal with that again. They learn, they get better, right? So maybe this little spike at the very beginning for whatever reason, maybe just implemented the tool for the first time, whatever it might be. But once that spike comes down, you should see a significant reduction in each one of those scans. It should get cleaner and cleaner. Now I get it. There's going to be spikes, so it's also good to track that. New vulnerabilities come out, new exploits. Those spikes are important to track too, which could happen later in the game. But you should see that improve over time, or if it's not, again, then maybe that's a story about, hey, we need more security training for our developers, right? Maybe the tools are finding too many false positives, and the developers aren't they're not utilizing the scan results the way they should, and they're just ignoring, things like that. So this is one that I really like. The mean time to resolve. This isn't really anything new. I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with this, but you think about it in terms of when a vulnerability is detected, right, and then how long does it take to be able to fix that vulnerability, once it's detected. And this is one that can show like, hey, and again, you might see this, kind of, go up and down quite a bit over time. But this is going to tell you some important things as well, right? It's going to tell you right away is that, hey, do we have the right resources to be able to fix the vulnerabilities that are in our environment? Do they have the tools? Do they have the resources, the training to be able to go through and fix things quickly, right? Are we prioritizing vulnerabilities and the right vulnerabilities, right? Maybe some vulnerabilities are sitting out there for a long time because they're not prioritized, or we're not really explaining what the risk is, and the MTTR goes down. So this can tell you a lot about your organization health Because of course we'd love to have, hey, vulnerability came out, we're fixing the issue, as quickly as possible, but that's not always the case. And then findings over time, this is another one that we like to utilize just to be able to track, generally how we're tracking overall. So how many findings are we detecting in our environment, and then resolving those as well, to show how these two graphs are kind of coming together. So of course it's always going to go up and to the right here. So that could take some explanation to your leadership of why it's always increasing. But in the end, what's important about this one is you've got a detected line and a resolved line. So you should expect to see that resolved line move up, right, over time, as you get better at fixing vulnerabilities and issues in your environment. So this can be a good way to see how are we tracking to that, and maybe if it's not, if it goes the other way, again, we're having some challenges, we're detecting about the same number of vulnerabilities, but we're resolving fewer. What's going on there, right? So it can give you some health checks about, that you can go dive deeper to see what the root cause is and help you tell that story. So this one's relatively new, and all the metrics that I just walked through were more around, hey, this is how we're performing based off our our security, our risk posture, our tools, things of that nature. But one thing that especially coming from Big Four consulting, working with a lot of leaders, is that if you can tie the work that you're doing to dollar signs, it's a very good thing. And it's been a challenge to do in security. We're seen as a cost center, right? Oh, we got to have the security teams because it's at least now that company leaderships get that, hey, there's huge impacts if you don't have a good security team, with breaches, data loss, reputational risks. There's a lot of things out there. So for the most part, security is a known need. If it's not, there's a different problem typically. But it's still a cost center, right? So this is cost. We got to spend all this money on security. It's helpful to be able to show, hey, we're getting better as a security team. And again, tying to engineering and tying to that velocity is a great thing to be able to do. How do we do that? This gets into, again, not just looking at your production environment and some of the risks and issues and having metrics around that, but in your development stages, tracking how you're fixing it, if you have stage gates or different development stages, how you're fixing those issues pre-production, and then tying that directly to a dollar amount, right? Because that is shifting left, right? And that was a buzzword, and a lot of people are tired of hearing about it. But it is, if you can show this, and if your leadership, they heard about the buzzword, hey, what are we doing to shift left? What are we doing to fix things earlier on? You can show, hey, if we're fixing things pre-production, you can tie that directly to a dollar amount, because you can say, hey, it costs us, it takes us approximately, 4 hours to fix a vulnerability once it's into production, and then how much is a typical, developer hourly rate? It's just simply, that's the calculation here, and that'll tell you how much money that you're saving by implementing. By fixing things in pre-production, before things go live. So I think that's an important piece for shift left, is that, hey, we're fixing things earlier, but then that dollar amount, we want to look good, we want to make our engineers look good, and we want to, tell our leadership that how much money that we're saving by doing this. And then the exposure window, this is one that we're utilizing as well, is how long are these vulnerabilities remaining open in our environment? And a couple things to think about, right? It could be that, hey, we had to risk accept this issue. So, we're looking at, it's a known risk and it's out there. It can tell you it's time to go back and revisit that vulnerability, right? Is it still, we risk accepted it, 1 month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. Now it's time to go back and take a look at that. So it can help you with that to say, hey, do we have these vulnerabilities that are remaining open in our environment because it's been out there for a long time. And things can change. Your risk profile can change. You can bring in new technology. So as those changes happen, you can go back and look, hey, from our exposure window, do we need to go back and reevaluate that accepted risk or that known risk in our environment? So this is another one that can be helpful just to tell you, hey, where we're doing well, maybe where we're having some challenges. So just to kind of summarize this, and again, at the end, Homer's feeling pretty good. You know, he's been working out, and this is kind of a summary of all the metrics that we just walked through. But again, those context metrics, you know, I would consider internal, right? It's really more for the security team internally to help you kind of track and where you're going and how you're doing. Maybe put those in the appendix of a presentation to leadership to be able to support that. But again, that context is always important to talk about the risk. And then those more external organizational metrics that I walk through, you know, you can utilize those in a lot of different scenarios with your security team, combined with your engineering team. I think that's great. Like, you know, you work together with the engineering team, show up to leadership, say, here's how we're doing. We have a combined, here's our DORA metrics, and here's our security DORA metrics, right? So thinking about that in terms of aligning, you know, metrics programs and telling that story together to show how you know, application security and development teams are aligned. All right, so here's my shameless plug. I know a lot of you have stopped by the booth, but one of the challenges in developing the metrics is where do you get the data from, right? And I think it's, you know, if you've got a lot of different tools out there, overall it's, you know, there's a lot of great tools, but aggregating that data into a single data source and then being able to create metrics out of that, it's a lot of work. It's not very repeatable. You're going to find yourself scrambling to put together these metrics if you've got a meeting with your leadership or, you know, with a vendor or whoever it might be, with a customer. So looking at a centralized platform to capture all this data can be super helpful. And that's what we're doing at JIT, is looking to create this orchestration platform and this centralized platform, you know, across your development lifecycle and also into runtime. And then by implementing a centralized tool like a JIT, it'll give you that data that you can utilize to create those metrics in a much faster way. So something to think about too, you know, when you're telling your security story, it's like, where am I going to get all this data from, right? And is something that we can aggregate and put together quickly, or is it going to be something that's going to be a big challenge? Because if it's not repeatable, if it's not something that you can, week to week or bi-weekly or quarter to quarter, however you look at your metrics update, it's going to be a big challenge. And in the end, maybe it's something you don't want to do, you just don't have time for it. And here's just a view of these metrics are automatically generated by JIT. So once you've turned on the controls, you've integrated with your system, you'll get some of these out of the box rapidly. And I can tell you right now, just transparently, we are at the beginning from a JIT perspective of, you know, we're quite frankly more focused on the developer experience. So we're going to keep growing in this area, the security, DORA, and find those metrics that are the most impactful, because we have that luxury of having all this data in a single source and how we can utilize to tell that story. So, you know, to me, this is really a beginning of that transition of better metrics that can be utilized, again, to show alliance and working together between engineering and security teams that can be utilized for leadership. And we're going to look to get, you know, better and better here. But I feel like that's where this is going, and getting away from kind of the old way of security telling a story for more job justification and more about, hey, how we're helping the business overall. All right, so that's, I'm going to stop there. I'm happily take some questions. But again, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming to the talk. There's some other great talks at this time. I'll be checking them out when the video comes out as well. But happily answer any questions. And again, just thanks everybody for the time this week, and really enjoyed it. Any questions? Yes, please.
You know, one of the feedback that I have gotten a lot of the time with different groups when you take these kind of metrics is like, what is the real attack surface business perspective? It's like, because a lot of the time, the tool is going to tell you that, okay, you have this XYZ vulnerability, but how can, what is the real attack surface? Because those things are not considered. So, like, I just question, it's, it does not give the true picture of what it is.
I think it's a great point, and if I kind of summarize that, is that the business side, right, of like and looking at the attack surface, and then the prioritization of the real risks
The
out
real
there,
risk,
right?
What it shows, like, okay, I have 2,000 vulnerabilities, but those 2,000, what is the real risk for our business?
Yes.
With those 2,000 vulnerabilities, which one is higher?
Yes, and I think that's an important point with like every company is a little bit different. I think it's a cop out, but looking to see, hey, how can we pull in to say, hey, we've done some threat modeling, right? Or it has been some good talks on threat modeling. We understand our attack surface, so our environment, and based off of that, these are the highest risks. We know these were known risks, real risks to our environment, and we address those straight away, and then tying that into MTTR, right? The mean time to resolve. That could be a way that you do that. But in the end, I think you've got to have a couple things for that to be effective against the data sources, right? Is your architecture, do you fully understand your architecture and all your resources? Do you understand what are the most, the crown jewels of your data? Do you know the resources that are the most vulnerable, right? That you want to protect the most? If you've got those kind of building blocks, you can plug that into this. You can add that extra layer for senior leadership to show, hey, not only are we operating well as a security team, we're supporting velocity, but we're also addressing the most important risks. But I think that's another thing. It's a bit of it's another effort to add in that context to be able to put that in. And in terms of automation, honestly, I don't know a good tool right now to automate that. I don't know if you've seen any out there. Yeah.
People have tried to do some stuff like they do application ranking. That's
Yes.
in a positive direction. They do the threat intel and all those. But it's still, you, like a person right now, pretty much practically what I'm talking about, we have to go and analyze the issue and really understand what my real threat is, and only then we can convince the engineering team to remediate it.
Yes.
So if I am just going to throw the vulnerability, we are not going to remediate.
Well, I definitely agree with that. I think, to me, it's a couple of different things, though, right? One is like, what's the real risk, and then getting that over to an engineer or developer. Absolutely, like there needs to be some level of tuning your tools, removing false positives. You have some intelligence there, right? And also add rankings. Yes, absolutely. In terms of providing those vulnerabilities to developers to fix, as a security professional, you should absolutely do that. In terms of showing how you're doing that from a metrics perspective, though, like the outcome of, hey, we've fixed this many high vulnerabilities. Great. Well, what does it mean in terms of tying that? For me, that's some more manual processes right now, but it's something we're looking to solve for sure. We're talking about it. So, but it sounds like you haven't seen any tools out there that would help you automate that.
Well, I have used in my past different tools, but none of them were like really good.
Right.
They all have issues.
Yes.
Have you seen any customers that are taking the application performance management that would have the stack traces and the exploitability as well as the business SLAs, so that you could take the business SLAs and say, here's what we've seen in our production environment, and these SLAs then can be tracked to these type of CVEs, because we know that this code can be reached and exploitable, and then taking in information like your mean time to repair on your vulnerabilities and the issues, and then tying that into the service model. Because things like your access keys are a dead easy way to show it across the board, because you can even tell your board, like the legal team, that the access keys that were leaked in our competitor cost them X number of dollars. So that I'm wondering how that can be pulled in and basically say, like, this type of issue, like you were saying here, this type of issue we've seen in this industry or a complementary industry, those costs versus we just blocked all of these, and so that is a potential savings.
I think that is the answer. I think that business logic, again, is that data readily available within the organization? Do they have the data? And then how do you integrate that into some type of an automated process to generate those metrics? I think that's like the $1 million solution there, $1 billion solution.
Yeah, because and you'd have to have the application performance
Yeah.
monitoring on that side.
Yeah, so integrating that, right, is another data source. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that I love that idea of moving to the security metrics. I think it's inevitable. The question to me is, and posing this to you, what do you say to the CISO who has pitched vulnerability count to their board for the last 2 decades and whose entire organization is staffed and funded around those other models, right? That to me is more of the transitional point that we're at as an industry with both security and engineering, or security engineering really fundamentally, is how do you shift that apparatus away, right, to do that and effectively walk back those bad metrics, which I 100% agree are shit metrics, right? But how do you actually get them to walk that back without losing face and without calling into question their budget and team size to support that? Because it also at the team and individual level, it becomes existential, right? If your job is to find vulnerabilities and flip them over the wall to the development team, no matter where they come from, and now these new metrics, whether it's reachability, exploitability, or something else, are saying you should stop doing that for 2/3 of what's in your backlog. It is absolutely existential for that group. Why would they lean into this?
Yeah, I think I love the point, and I don't know if I love it, but it makes a lot of sense. I think for larger organizations that have been doing things kind of the same way for a long time, I mean, yes, there's no easy answer there. I mean, the CISO has built up a team. In a lot of cases, they've built up an entire organization. They've got a well-running organization. Some of these metrics don't tell the whole story. I think for that part, I go back to first off, it doesn't have to change overnight, right? I mean, you can go through and say, is the CISO, by the way, that's that's their job to figure out what's the trade. I still need these people, right? Or if I don't need this team, I mean, that's like I said, it's kind of existential there. But thinking through about what, again, it's value and the messaging back to from the CISO up to the board or to leadership. Thinking through the story they want to tell, and then thinking about that transition plan, right? Of hey, we used to show total vulnerability count. We are transitioning to this because now we're going to focus on the most important risks, right? But making sure you've got your team covered, because if you need your team about what additional metrics are you going to show about how you're performing well. Maybe that gets into the cost savings, right? Hey, we're fixing more high priority issues pre-production, and we're saving this amount of money. And if we didn't have these application security engineers working with us and part of our team, again, that's not going to happen, right? Because you need them to be able to analyze and help with that assessment. But there's no easy answer. I mean, for smaller companies or startups, it's different. But I'm with you. For the larger companies, there's definitely a level of a transition there, and you got, from a leadership. To me, it's less of flipping the switch. From a leadership perspective, you think about what do I need in terms of resources, skill sets, and where am I going with my program. With our program, that's something that the CISO needs to really figure out. It's their job. Yeah, Dylan, please.
Just to kind of add on to that, because I think if you're going to show a dashboard like this with these new metrics, just showing those old metrics at the same time for some period of time can be the easiest way to do that, right? Like, hey, here's what you're used to, here's the new thing, and then over time, just make that box smaller and smaller, right? And eventually, hopefully they'll see the value in the new metrics over the old.
Would you say like it's also a matter of not just the two metrics compared side by side, but showing in the old way, we were seeing these CVEs, but in the last few years, it's not just seeing the CVEs, but them being weaponized. And that might be a way to say, hey, our team's still correcting this, but now we're going from just that detection mode over to prevention and saving our company the ransomware.
I think that's still a security-minded point of view of what the metric is. If you step back and you're a board member, right, audit committee, something like that, I don't think that resonates the same way. What they're really looking at is, what is my risk to the business? How's it going to stop our operation or impede us or not? Or how will this increase velocity, right? So I love the DORA metrics because you can add velocity and even what Shannon talked about yesterday of like moving towards velocity. And I think security can empower velocity, but I don't think we show that with the metrics that we use today.
Yeah.
And so the idea of counts, right? And in some ways, it reflects the immaturity we have as an industry, because if you remember at the dawn of the internet, companies, in the late 90s, people measured registered users. That was how they got VC funding. That was how they did all of that, right? That's how product teams were driven. Now, you would be laughed out of any pitch presentation or board meeting if you talked about user count, right? They don't care. They want monthly active users.
Yes.
Because they've converted that thinking to what is value, right? Or they want paid subscribers, and they want to know about your subscriber to free subscriber ratio, right? Like that,
Yeah.
They've matured that thinking, and we haven't done that in security because we're so fear-driven in the metrics, and so it's like, I've seen this firsthand, right? It is a death grip on those bad metrics because vulnerability count is the fear. That is the fear, and unless we're willing to let go of being fear-driven and move to being value-driven, we're not going to see that change in the industry.
That's a great point. Love the discussion. Any other questions or comments?
Have you been able to convince any companies to change that mindset?
We'll see.
Okay.
I mean, to your point, like startups, yeah, like right,
Yeah.
and that's the easy sell, and it makes it drives a ton of value, and you can drive a lot of success driving that and taking that approach. It's the large organizations that are operating a certain way for a certain amount of time where that's a much harder sell.
And it might just be not just security, but the audit team, that they justify their existence by this
both.
compliance checklist.
Yeah, it's both, for sure.
Great.
Yeah, in a smaller company, that checklist methodology is not going to work.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again. It's been an awesome couple of days. We've got another talk to go, right? One more talk and then the end. Very good. All right. Thanks, everybody.